5 days ago, I created a community post posing the question about if you were to consider your ideal homestead, what would be the acreage that you would choose? 506 of you responded, and the breakdown is as follows. 19% chose less than 5 acres. 34% who cast a vote chose 5 to 10 acres, and that actually was the majority. 19% as well, tied with less than 5, was 10 to 25 acres. 10% of you chose 25 to 50 acres, and 17% of the votes that were cast wanted more than 50 acres. Obviously, when you're purchasing land, it's a huge commitment, it's a big decision, and there's a lot more that one would want to take into consideration, more so than just the acres itself. Things such as, what's the water situation like? What's the access to the property like? What's existing on the property? What are your threats and needs analysis? So this wasn't really about that. This was more or less just about the acres. But one of the first things that I'm going to look at with regard to any property that I buy is really workload. I need to be able to manage that property from a time standpoint, a financial standpoint, and just being able to commit to managing the workload. So that's going to be the first thing that I determine before I get to assessing how many acres that I actually want. Because, you know, it would be very cool to have a large piece of property. It'd be cool to have 1,000 acres. But when you're the person who's doing all the work, you know, that's got to be the primary consideration, at least from my standpoint. The second thing that I'm going to determine in looking at my property, assessing what my acres are going to be potentially, is I want to determine what livestock I want on that property. Let's just say hypothetically, I want 20 chickens, 3 sheep, maybe a pig, maybe a cow. If that's going to be my hypothetical livestock that I want, what I need to assess for that, the way that I'm thinking about it, is I want those animals to be primarily supported by the land itself. Because one of the things that's very easy to do when you have property is overstock it. You know, I've done that here on my property, you know, years ago, many years ago. I used to buy truckloads of hay to support the livestock that I had on the property. But there came a time and a realization that, you know what, I don't really like losing money. I've scaled things back over the years, and that's one of my big considerations, is how well can the land that I have support the animals? And that actually has been accelerated in the last few years because of the fact that we have had so many issues with regard to supply chain issues. We've had a lot of issues as it relates to the cost of feed going up. So those are all things that I'm going to assess in determining what I want to have on my property. Before I get to the acres, I would need to assess what the quality of the land is, because I could have really good soil with great access to water, and I could have my property set up in a way that I could have fairly minimal acres and support my hypothetical 20 chickens and 3 lambs and et cetera. But I may need a lot more land if my quality of my land is very poor. That hypothetical right there, those 20 chickens, 3 sheep, cow, hog, that could easily be managed on a 10-acre property. You know, and the way that I'm thinking is, if in my ideal setup, I've got, say, 5 acres of irrigation, and then I've got 4 acres of basically dry land pasture that I can kind of manage them throughout the seasons. So I really look at the selection of, or the management of, a homestead property from sustainability versus self-reliance. So yes, I may be able to sustain my current situation, but I'm not self-reliant because I'm dependent upon those outside inputs to sustain my livestock. My thinking on this has evolved over time, but as you get into homesteading, you'll find that you're forced to make changes to the way that you thought, because there's things that you thought you knew that you actually didn't know, or things change, circumstances change, the weather changes. So that's kind of how I look at it as it relates to selecting acreage for what I'm looking for in a homestead. That does not in any way mean that's what someone else should do. However, I think that there's a lot of benefit in sharing ideas, and I encourage you guys to share your ideas with me, because obviously there may be something that I hadn't considered that you've considered, and I may benefit from that. So I encourage you to put your input in, and I really appreciate everybody's participation in this. These little thought experiments are kind of fun. I hope they're useful for you, and yeah, I look forward to doing it again. Please consider subscribing if you have not, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.